Welcome everyone to today's Uncommon Journeys episode. Um, I am Mivy, your host. Um, I am one of the facilitators at Uncommon, and I host this, like I just said. I have ADHD, and yes, I'm just happy to be here. So these sessions are designed to inspire and empower our neurodivergent community by showcasing lovely individuals such as Nidhi here, yeah, who are just going to share their experiences, challenges, and triumphs. Nidhi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'll keep it short. My name is Nidhi, like Mivy said, and I am 22 and I am autistic and ADHD. And I'm also a medical student and I'm currently studying medicine in London. And it's really long, so I'm in my fourth year of 6 years, so still a long way to go. But yeah, that's a little bit about me.
6 years is so long. Sorry, this is me already getting into completely away from my questions, but when did you decide that you wanted to be a medic? I guess you need to do that quite early.
So I needed to start applying when I was like 17, or like doing work experience when I was 16. But it wasn't really like a light bulb moment of like, I'm gonna study medicine. And it wasn't really like me from like the age of 3 years old being like, I want to do medicine. My mum is a doctor and she tried really hard to put me off medicine, believe it or not. She was like, it's quite a tough career. And I think she wanted to make sure that if I wanted to do it, I really wanted to do it. And it wasn't just because she did it. But I found that through my work experience, I really enjoyed speaking to people, hearing about different people's journeys. And I knew I wanted to do some kind of career that was like a caring role, I guess. I think that's probably quite common for us neurodivergent individuals. And so, yeah, after work experience, I kind of decided that, yeah, let's give medicine a go and see what happens. And here we are.
Here we are, nearly 6+ years later, I guess. Yes, time. Lovely. Well, it's so lovely to have you here. Thank you so much for coming. I'm probably going to jump between lots of different timelines, so hopefully people can keep up. Let's touch on first, growing up, because we just had a chat before this. And I usually ask people like, um, I usually ask people what it was like growing up. So, of what it was like growing up neurodivergent. But I'm going to start first of all. You mentioned you were slightly late diagnosed. So, could you tell us about your journey so far, and then we'll go back.
Yeah, so I guess I'll like start from the start to try and make it as much sense as possible. So when I was 2, I was diagnosed with something at the time that was called sensory processing disorder. I was the firstborn child. So at the time, at the beginning, my parents, I think, probably assumed that I was like every child and that every child struggled to put socks on in the morning and every child screamed and shouted when someone tried to brush their hair or would scream and shout if there was any food on their face when they were being fed. And then they started to realize that maybe actually that's not 100% what everyone's like. And so I was diagnosed at the age of 2 with sensory processing disorder, basically because I had a lot of like hypersensitivity. So basically, I was sensitive to like a lot of different things in the environment, whether that's like noise, light, sounds, foods, all kind of different things. And then when I was at school, primary school and secondary school, I found it quite difficult to like the whole making friends and that kind of thing. I mean, I'd say I find it quite easy to make friends, but maintaining those friendships is a whole different story. And so I can have a conversation with anyone, but then trying to like keep that relationship going, I guess. And I'm quite like black and white, like I'll say it how it is. Um, and so it did get me into a fair amount of trouble when I was at school, in terms of like I'd tell kids that like I know that their drawing was ugly or this, that, and the other. And then get taken in to speak to the teacher and wouldn't really understand what I did wrong. Most of the time it was actually standing up for other people. So I'd get myself into trouble and then be like, but I did the right thing, so I don't understand why I'm getting in trouble. But it was more the way that I was conveying what I was feeling and thinking, and stuff like that. And then when we got into secondary school, I feel like the shift between primary and secondary school is quite big. And you've got all these now, these big exams that you need to start studying for and stuff like that. I did GCSEs and A levels. And my mental health wasn't the best, I'd say, especially in times where I was more stressed or like doing exams or in high pressure situations, I guess. And then in lockdown, I think like a lot of people struggled with the big change. I should probably have said at the start, but I lived in Dubai for most of my schooling. And in Dubai, the rules were quite different to the UK. So you weren't allowed to leave your house at all for any reason whatsoever. One person was allowed to go out to do a food shop during the week, but they had to be over 18 and I wasn't. And so I didn't leave the house for like 80 days or something like that, like not even to go for a walk. And so I found it really difficult. And my like senses were just really heightened. Like I couldn't sit at the dinner table with my family because I just end up screaming and running away. And I couldn't explain to anyone how I was feeling. And I didn't think I really knew how I was feeling. And so my mum said to me, right, Nidhi, you need to reach out and you need to speak to someone and come like kind of figure out what's going on. And so I spoke to the school counselors and told them that I'd been finding online school quite difficult and also just general lockdown quite difficult. And then for like the academic aspect, they referred me to like the SEND department, like the special education needs department that I think most schools have. And I had a meeting with them and my mum, and we kind of went through my entire life story in a lot more detail than what I'm telling you guys. And she was like, Nidhi, what do you think is going on? And funnily enough, I had been doing a little bit of research because I was like, there's something that's like not quite right. There's something like I almost felt like, and this is a bit of a cliche, but I felt like I was like dropped onto a planet where no one spoke my language, is the way that I like describe it. And I'd come across a video of this girl talking about that she'd recently got diagnosed as autistic. And in my head, I was like, this isn't really what I think autism is. But again, saying that, what did I really know? And so I kind of took a brave moment and I said to the teacher, well, I saw this video and I know it sounds really silly and blah, blah, blah. And she goes, actually, Nidhi, I think you're quite right. And so then I got referred to an educational psychologist, went down the whole autism pathway. And then at 17, so in 2021, I was diagnosed as autistic. And then when I got to uni, actually only a year ago, I also got diagnosed with ADHD. So that's a very whirlwind tour of my diagnoses.
So succinct though, and so yeah, it's such a whirlwind, for sure. I can definitely relate to kind of not, I can make friends quite easily, I think, but absolutely so bad at keeping them. I always kind of say that I have like emotional object permanence, where it's just kind of like out of sight, out of mind. They exist, but yeah, it's really tricky. So you touched on a few things like sensitivities and stuff kind of growing up, but what would you say were kind of like your strengths, or like what were your passions growing up? And I guess how did they kind of lead into where you are now?
Yeah, I think that more than anything else, I was really resilient. If someone told me, maybe stubborn probably is the right word. If someone told me that I couldn't do something, I was going to show them that I could, and I was going to work harder than anyone else to prove to them that I could. And so from a young age, I had quite poor like coordination, like and muscle tone. I was also born premature, so that was probably like a big part of it. I never like crawled, and I had a lot of like muscle issues. I had to go to classes where I'd spend hours learning how to write because I couldn't really hold a pen and stuff like that. And so my parents like try to put me in like as many different sports things as possible, just to, like try and help with that like hand-eye coordination. So as I got older, it wouldn't be as difficult. And then I tried lots of different things. I tried swimming, I tried ballet, I tried pretty much everything you can imagine. And somehow ended up in netball. I was by no means the best. I was quite tall and really lanky growing up. And so it worked quite well because I'd stick my arms up and I'd be in the way. But what I realized was that all the like pent up energy slash frustration of like people not really understanding me, I kind of take out in the game to some extent. And so that became like my hyper focus. I got very into netball. I think I started playing it when I was like 6. And then it kind of went up from there. And it was tough. My journey was very tough. I am hypermobile, like probably a lot of neurodivergent individuals. And so had a lot of injuries over the years. And every time I got injured or every time I faced a coach who didn't really understand me, it kind of made me want to work even harder to show them that, like, if you're telling me I can't do it, I'm going to show you that I can. And that's exactly what I did. And so just before COVID, I was fortunate enough to represent the UAE where I lived, playing netball. So I played against England, Scotland, Ireland, and Wales, which was really cool. But again, knowing me, I got to that point and I was like, right, I'm a bit bored now. I need to do something else. And so I think I needed sport in my life, and I really do need sport in my life. And so I got into going to the gym, and then I guess now it's become running as well. And I think the other thing, I guess, aside from sports, is the whole like neurodiversity side of things. And I think, again, that's quite common for neurodivergent individuals, is that like hyper focus on like who we are and wanting to know anything and everything. And sorry, this is going to be a really long answer, so I apologize. But when I got my diagnosis in 2021, which was my autism diagnosis to begin with, it was like I was told, like, right, you're autistic. Now, like, go into the world and just like do whatever. And I was like, what does that mean? And my parents were like, what does that mean? And my friends were like, what does that mean? And so there weren't really any answers. I did a lot of like looking on Google and on social media and all sorts. And at the time, 5 years ago, a lot of the information out there was either written by like scientists, which didn't really make much sense to me, or were written by like mums who were like crying over their children, and they were like, they're never going to be able to do this and they're never going to be able to do that. And I was like, actually, that's not my story. And so I took to my room and I just started like writing down everything I could possibly think of in a Word document of like what I wanted people to know about who I was. And then I showed that to my parents, and they told me to show it to school, showed it to friends. And then I realized, with a bit of encouragement from my family, that maybe I could turn this into something like a bit more impactful. And so I guess you'll probably ask me about this in a bit, and I'll end the answer here. But I started a platform called Behind the Smiles, to kind of create acceptance, awareness, empowering neurodivergent individuals, supporting them. And yeah.
I love that answer. And thank you for naturally segueing into another question, which, um, how did you go about kind of like so you have the kind of concept of behind the smiles, but then how did you take that and turn it into something tangible and like put yourself out there and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I think I actually did it the reverse way to maybe how I explained it. But I wrote this big document, and then my like family and friends in school were like, it would be really useful if we could make this public for other teachers to look at, other parents to look at, other autistic people to look at. And so I thought to myself, like, how could I do that? And my dad is very tech savvy, and he's kind of like that entrepreneurial side. And so he was like, what if you make a website and you break this 10,000 word document into bite-sized blogs? And so I spent like a year kind of like breaking that all down, because I was in the midst of my A levels as well. And I also built a website. Don't ask me how, but when you're neurodivergent and you set your mind to something, you do it. And so I got onto Wix and then basically created what I wanted this website to look like. And I never really thought of myself as a creative person. I think maybe because when I think of creative, I think of someone that's like a really good drawer or really good this or that. But I think it was a way for just me to like channel everything that I could possibly want into something that was fully in my control. Um, and so, yeah, it started off with me just writing blogs. Um, and then I got asked to speak. And I was like, oh my God, speak. What does that mean? But it kind of like took off from there. So I spoke to some students at a school, and then the word got round that I spoke to one school, spoke to another school, and then I was like, I got to university and started speaking to different organizations, different companies, started writing for like different organizations, I guess. I joined Uncommon when it was at the very start, a long time ago now. So yeah, I kind of just got into like the neurodiversity field, I guess. And then I think it was last summer, I realized that I wanted to do a whole revamp of Behind the Smiles. So again, spent my summer like redoing the website and turning it just from blogs into resources. So I made like basic like and like booklets, like leaflets, kind of like if you go to the GP or you go to the NHS and you get diagnosed with X or Y, they give you like a leaflet to read. And I was like, actually, it'd be really cool if you get diagnosed and you could give someone a very short leaflet and being like, hey, this is a little bit about me. And so, yeah, I guess it's my journey's evolved quite a lot and it's still very much evolving, especially because I'm kind of doing it on the side of everything else that I love to do. But yeah.
No, that's so cool. I think yeah, one of the things that when I was diagnosed with ADHD, I really had to educate some of my friends who are completely neurotypical, and it was, you know, kind of challenging because I was still learning about myself, and also kind of tiring because I was like, I don't have the mental capacity right now. I'm trying to also understand myself. So being able to like just give a leaflet to somebody about your autism diagnosis and like how can you help me and stuff like that. That's such a lovely thing to do. What are some of the kind of like, I guess, are you trying to like combat any, like there's lots of myths out there, or misunderstandings about neurodivergence. Are there any that you absolutely try and challenge, or is it more so just kind of trying to educate people in general? Like how are you kind of discussing things?
Yeah, I think through educating, you kind of like challenge those myths without realizing it.
Mm.
Like whenever I like do a talk, I always start with like, if you had to describe someone that's autistic, what do you think they look like? And where do you kind of get that knowledge and that interpretation from? And like completely rightly so, a lot of people think of like a boy, maybe he struggles quite a lot socially, he doesn't have many friends. And where do we get that from? Well, if we think about it, it's probably from TV shows or social media. I know like I absolutely love watching programs like The Good Doctor, but if that's all you ever see, then that's kind of what you think is autism, and that's all that it is. And so I think through everything that I've done, I've made people maybe think a little bit more about like, well, if she's autistic, then maybe it's not just like a one size fits all kind of approach. I think the other thing, which is probably like the biggest thing for me, has been empowering people, but also showing like families and friends that a diagnosis is so empowering rather than the other way. Like I know for my family, like it was a big thing of like, if we tell people she's autistic, what will that mean for her? And I completely understand it. It's not that they wanted to hide who I was, but it was what like the stigma from everyone else. And from a black and white perspective, I was like, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. But at the end of the day, we're living in a society where you can say it doesn't matter, but that doesn't mean it's not going to matter to everyone else. And so my big thing has been like trying to get across that you can do anything that you want. And if anything, I find that neurodivergent people, and maybe I'm just being boastful here, but are so much more resilient because we've had to put up with so many more obstacles. And like a story that I go back to often. So the place where I was diagnosed, in Dubai, they recently told me this story about this mum that had come in and her son. They kind of knew that he was autistic, but she didn't want to get a formal diagnosis because he wanted to be an astronaut when he grew up, and he wanted to work in NASA. And she said, if he gets an autism diagnosis, I think like that will kind of not stop him, but make it harder for him to get to that place where he wants to be. And then I kind of spoke to her and she told her a little bit about my story, and then he did end up getting a diagnosis. And so I think it's like not little things, but like things like that that have the biggest impact on me. And I think hopefully on the community as well, that like having a diagnosis actually can be so empowering. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely feel like having, like there are some negatives that come with having a label, but being able to have that label means it's like a shorthand for like finding out stuff about yourself, or like for those who do understand, like being able to be like, I'm ADHD. It helps people understand you so much better than, like having to really get into the nitty-gritty of anything. So yeah, I that's such an interesting story, and I definitely think that I've heard that quite a few times. I think even from my mum, when I was thinking of getting a diagnosis, she was like what benefit is that, and for me it was during university. It meant that I'd be able to then apply for like extra help and stuff like that. So yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense. How do you come up with like the topics and the content that you have for Behind the Smiles? Is it just personal experiences, or is it kind of like what you see? Do people approach you? How does that come about?
I get asked this question a lot, actually. It's funny. That's why I'm giggling. Um, it sounds really silly, but it is literally just my day to day. And something will happen that will like trigger me to be like, I need to write this down. And it never starts as me writing a blog. It normally starts off as me on my notes app, like on like the commute home or something, like rambling about something that's happened during the day. And then it will turn into like a blog, I guess. Like I did one recently, recently, last year, that was my most recent blog, was about like healthcare and like accessing the GP. And I'd been really ill for like quite a long time and had tried to like get a GP appointment and just found it like really, really difficult. And I was lying in bed, literally crying my eyes out, writing on this notes app because I just felt that like no one understood me. And I also felt so frustrated that like I'm a medical student. This is a system I'm going into. And like if I can't navigate it, how can anyone else navigate it? And I literally like wrote and wrote and wrote, and it ended up being like my most like viewed like LinkedIn post, and or like I'm like it's kind of like spread from there. So I find that like the ones that I write like in the moment, like with the emotion, are the ones that like tend to do the best. So it's rarely that like I find if I sit down and be like, today you need to write a blog about this, it turned into a job and I cannot do it then. It has to be like it like comes to me in the moment.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense because it's from passion, and I guess you're touching real people rather than being like super clinical about it. And yeah, what's been your kind of like, I guess, proudest moment of your advocacy journey so far? And that's such a, like a cliche question, but I'd love to hear it.
Um, that's a tough one. I don't think I have like one particular thing, but I think like recently when was it? It was a few weeks ago maybe. I was back home in Dubai and I went to my primary school. I got invited to my primary school to speak to some of the parents, some of the students and some of the teachers about like my journey and being neurodivergent and how they could help like neurodivergent students. And for me, it was like a full circle moment of like, this is where it all started. And like now I'm back here being invited to speak about it. So I think that for me was like a eye opener. I also absolutely love like not picking favorites, but I love speaking to like young adults, like the future generation. Like I find that I mean, you guys on this call have so many like important things and so many valuable points to say. And I find that like a lot of the time there's so much emphasis, especially on the British system of like schooling and maths and English and all these things when sometimes you just need that opportunity to like voice how you're feeling. And like as young individuals you have so many like creative thoughts that like listening to other people I get so inspired, like wow, this is what the future like generation's gonna look like and it's in safe hands. So yeah.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And that's why we do this sort of thing. Let's see. I want to touch a bit about kind of like you mentioned your med journey your med journey. Um how are you navigating that? Because it's like long hours, like when we were talking earlier, you mentioned your schedule changes a lot. And yeah, how are you navigating everything to do with that as a neurodivergent person who I know like structure is such a big thing, and when you don't have structure and when you have so many plates spinning as well, how do you not burn out and stuff like that?
Yeah, I think the one thing that I'll probably start and end this answer with is literally taking it one step at a time. And I don't mean one day at a time. I mean like one half an hour at a time. Because I get overwhelmed very quickly. I like I don't know if you've seen the trend going around on TikTok, which is like, are you a type A person or a type B person? And I'm a type C person. I love structure, but I never have structure. It's like autism and ADHD like fighting each other constantly, which is such a weird one. Like I know, again, going off on a little bit of a tangent, like the co-occurrence is like quite high, but they are kind of like polar opposite things. And so trying to manage both is honestly really challenging. And I'm not going to sit here and be like, oh my God, like life's so great. I wouldn't want to be doing anything else, but I do find it really tough. And I also find that it's hard to be in an environment where you're with these like super high achieving individuals. I know that I often struggle with burnout, and I do. I think my diagnosis has helped me recognize it, which I think is probably the most important thing. But it doesn't mean that I don't burn out, and maybe that's, well, probably because I'm still very much learning, and I still take on way more than I can chew because I want to do everything, and I hate saying no. But yeah, I think it is tricky. I think the one thing that keeps me going is the fact that I love what I do. And the minute I stop loving what I'm doing is when I find it really difficult. And so like going into hospital, like, yeah, I might not want to get out of bed one day because I'm feeling really overstimulated, but the majority of the time when I get there, I'm in an environment where I feel at home. I think the other thing is, and I saw this, it kind of relates to something else, but it was the days that you don't feel like going for a run are the days that you should go out for a run. And if you run for 10 minutes and you still don't feel like you should run, then you can go home. And that's how I think about everything. I'm like, okay, so if I'm feeling overstimulated, let me go to hospital. And if I get to lunchtime and I'm still feeling like the world is about to like fall, then I go home. And that's exactly what I do. And so, yeah, it comes back to like taking it one step at a time, and also trying your best not to compare yourself to others. And I think it's something only really this year that I'm like getting my head around, because it's tough when everyone else is like in the library or at hospital from like 8 till 8 every single day, and I have to leave at like 4 p.m. because that's it for me. I have to tell myself, no, Nidhi, that's okay. Everyone's different. And that's like, yeah, that's fine. I don't know if that fully answered your question.
No, it definitely does. Thank you. And I think it's so important for even just for me that you mentioned the type C person, because I definitely think again, it's black and white thinking. I am myself, I desperately want to be a type A person. I have then my like chaos gremlin that's like sitting in my brain constantly being like, no, schedule, no, whatever. And then I burn myself out because I want to be somebody that I don't know how sustainable it is for me, and instead I should really work with like the way that I work generally. So yeah, I'm so happy that you said that. In terms of like you mentioned that you struggle with burnout. I'm in the midst of kind of like healing after burning out. How do you go about that? How do you go about kind of like taking care of yourself beforehand, or like when you happen to realize like, oh no, I burnt myself out, how do you then look after yourself during that?
I think a lot of the time I don't realize I'm going into burnout. I really struggle to identify how I'm feeling. And so, what helps regulate what I'm doing? One is sport, but also I speak to my family every day. And so, I mean, even as a 22-year-old, I speak to my mom every day, and she kind of, all my family know when I'm like going down that path. And they're the ones that will be like, okay, Nidhi, like, you're doing too much. And a lot of the time I'll bite back and I'll be like, no, 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 I'm fine, because I never want to admit to someone that I'm doing too much. But then that evening I'll reflect and be like, okay, if this is happening, what can I do to like alleviate like me going down this path? And a lot of the time I feel almost a little bit embarrassed to like kind of accept that that's what's happening. I mean, I live alone, and the first thing that happens when I'm reaching burnout is that I kind of stop like properly eating, because I have to cook for myself. And so I'll realize that, oh, I've gone a week and eaten toast for every single meal because it's the easiest thing to do. And it's like going, okay, if you need to order takeout that's a little bit healthier, or if you need to order a meal delivery service, or if you need to do something else, like that's okay. And like for the longest time, I was like, no, no, no. Whether it was like, because I'm a uni student and trying to manage my budget, or whether it's because, well, if everyone else can do it, I can do it as well. But it's going, no, you need to take out the things that can be done by someone else. And my dad always says this to me. He goes, if you need to get someone that comes in and cleans your flat once a month, you do that, because if it means that you can carry on a daily basis, then that's what you need to do. And so again, it's coming back to like trying not to like focus on what everyone else is doing and focus on yourself. But I think when I get to the point of like burnout, which obviously does happen as much as like you'd like it not to happen, I I try to be kind to myself. So sometimes there will be a day where I just end up spending the whole day in bed and I'm like, okay, you needed this. But then I won't let myself stay in bed for more than one day because then it kind of just goes south. So I use like this technique where it's like 3, 2, 1 and like get up and just like move and leave the house. And so whether that will be like going to the shops to get something that I don't even need, but it means that I leave the house and then I find the minute I've given myself a task and I've achieved that task, you get that little bit of dopamine rush. And then it's like, okay, actually, I can do all my tasks now. And that's exactly what happened yesterday, actually. I went to hospital and it got to lunchtime and I was like, I actually can't be here. Went home, lay in bed. It got to 6 o'clock and I was like, right, okay, you need to like go cook and you need to make the bed. And so I was like, 3, 2, 1, get out of the house, go to the shops, buy some food, come home, and I clean the entire flat. So yeah, I think taking it little by little, but then you have to be like kind of disciplined with yourself.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. One thing that I wish I'd done more at uni, but I've started doing a lot more is kind of just like accommodating for myself. Like, I completely agree that sometimes if you have to buy even like pre-cut veg and that's
Yeah.
what makes your life easier, then go for it because otherwise, there's that whole kind of like tax that you pay as a neurodivergent person where
Yeah.
I was meant to like peel this pineapple and instead I let the pineapple just rot in the background because I didn't have the energy to do that. But if I bought chunks, then I would have eaten them, been healthy, da da da. So I completely relate and I completely agree that sometimes if it's what makes you be able to do something, then 100% do that because you need to look after yourself. And if you don't have energy compared to other people, then it's your life. I
Can
have
I just
an
add something on that
Yeah,
actually?
sure.
This is like my number one tip, and I think it's quite like relevant to any age because I know a lot of things we talk about, I guess, like living alone might not be relevant for everyone here. But what I find is like, even if it's just like doing homework or something like that, my favorite thing at the moment is like body doubling. And I'm not sure if everyone here has heard of that, but I can give you a quick little thing. So it's basically just like having another like presence, whether it's like physically or online, that like kind of hold you accountable. And so because I live alone, a lot of it I do is online. So it's either with like having a friend on FaceTime and it'll be like, I'm going to clean my flat and she's just literally there. We don't even say a word to each other, but it's just like someone else holding you accountable. Or the other thing I quite like when I'm feeling quite like socially drained is either putting on like a Netflix show where they like chat a lot, like Friends or something, or like a podcast. And so you just have noise in the background. And I find it really helps. And so even if we're thinking like at a secondary school level, in terms of like packing your bag for the next day, or if you feel you're procrastinating with homework, I find that like having something or someone to hold you accountable is really useful.
Yeah, that's such a good shout. I remember going to the library where people would like force me to work rather than my natural instinct would be like I need to be alone so that I can do my work and I can do whatever and then I'd end up watching Netflix for like way too long. But being in a library, like in a different place helps quite a lot of people are able to do that. I know in secondary school I could like sometimes work a little bit like either before the day started or like afterwards or like yeah going to a friend's house if you can do that and yeah that definitely helps a lot. We've kind of spoken about advocating for yourself um and accommodating for yourself. How do you do that as like a med student? Because I feel like things must be so like hustle and bustle. Like you said, there's probably quite a lot of kind of neurotypical people around you as well. So how do you kind of go about staying strong and like these are my needs, accommodating?
Um, Not very well. I think it's ironic, but being in a hospital setting, I've realized how far behind our healthcare system is. In terms of like, if we look at schools or we look at companies, like on the whole, I think they're very good at accommodating for everyone's needs. And then you get to a hospital and everything that just goes south. Whether you're a patient or whether you're a doctor, I think it's pretty appalling. And I don't think it's anyone's fault. I think it's the NHS that we're currently in, where everyone is struggling and everyone is just trying to like put their own oxygen mask on, never mind trying to help someone else. And so I think it's really, really difficult. I also think that the like the whole neurodiversity thing hasn't reached healthcare yet on the whole. And I think that what people think of like autism and ADHD is quite like antiquated, old fashioned. And so I don't really tell anyone in terms of doctors that I speak to on a daily basis that I'm autistic or ADHD. In fact, I've even had like like conversations or like listening to someone where they're talking about like an autistic patient or someone with ADHD and saying things that probably they shouldn't be saying, and I just sit there in silence because I don't really feel comfortable enough to be like, actually that's not true. And whether it's like the hierarchy or of the NHS, or whether maybe I should stand up for it. And I know we're always told to like stand your ground, but I think in a workplace setting I find it a lot harder to do. And so, yeah, I think it's challenging. I mean, I've spoken to like my medical school a few times about like even things about having a room that I can go when I'm feeling overwhelmed. Because I don't know how many of you guys have been in a hospital, but the lights are like white lights. They're not like nice warm lights. The noises are noisy. The smells are strong smells because obviously like the disinfectant and stuff. And so I do find it quite overpowering. And I spoke to the university and I was like, oh, is there anywhere I can get a quiet room? Like, surely there must be somewhere for patients that are neurodivergent. No, it doesn't exist. And so yeah, I find it quite challenging, whether it's for myself or like for patients. I'm like, how is this not a thing? But that's a whole different story. So going back to your question, of how do I advocate for myself in a hospital? Not very well. Hopefully, I'm really hoping that it gets. I mean, in the last 5 years, neurodiversity has completely taken off, and hopefully, in the next 5 years, we won't even have to have this conversation. But yeah, I think it's difficult. I think maybe, again, going back to what's relevant for you guys listening, in a school setting, teachers are quite good now on the whole. I know like special education needs departments really have like try to take on as much as they can. But yeah, it's about learning to advocate for yourself. And like if you can't do that, having a parent or a guardian or someone you feel comfortable with helping you do that.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I recently went to a doctor about like some other stuff, but I thought, mentioning I had ADHD would kind of like help with that. And the way he looked at me was just baffling because, and I'm so used to like people out in common that I speak to and it's like a normal thing. But yeah, not being able to kind of I don't know. It's crazy how behind something that definitely should be ahead because it's the field of medicine where your brain is and stuff. Yeah, one question that just popped up and I also thought of it. What medical field are you studying or hoping to go into?
So the way it works at like with my courses, so I do 6 years of medical school and then 2 years of like foundation training. And then after those 2 years, I decide what I want to do. So I've still got another 4 years before I have to decide. So I'm a long way away. I actually currently have no idea, if I'm being completely honest. I know I don't want to do surgery because I can't stand around a table for that long and I like speaking to people, but that's about it.
One thing that actually did pop into my mind, and I think would be very useful for all the kids listening, would be like medicine. You have so much to remember. I remember one of my friends that was studying had like tons of textbooks. I think it's the same as law that they always have like tons of stuff to remember. How do you go about, like studying, especially for tests? Uh, which is, I'm so sorry to bring this up, but yeah, how do you go about?
Okay, so if I think about it in more of a general concept, so how you can go about studying in general, whether you're studying for your end of year exams, GCSEs, A levels, or med school exams, the way, and now everyone's brain is different, but what I found is my sister's also neurodivergent, and the way both of us seem to work, and I do a lot of tutoring as well for like GCSEs and stuff, is that as neurodivergent individuals, we're constantly asking the question, why? Why is this happening? If we get told you need to do something, why do I need to do that? And so memorizing something doesn't work on the whole. Because if you're telling someone like, I don't know, um, let's take literally anything like this plus this equals that, or like this muscle is called this. If you don't know the why, it doesn't stick in my brain. And so it's painstaking because it means that I probably spend a lot more time like rote learning and like looking back at stuff that probably you don't need to know. Like I know when I was doing like GCSE chemistry, even like a lot of your GCSE subjects are all about just memorizing, especially when it comes to the sciences. And so everyone else would be spending a few hours working and then that's about it. And I would spend so much longer because I need to understand why everything happens to then be able to move forward. And so the way I think about it is if you understand the principle behind it, you never need to memorize anything because you can apply what you've learned to anything going forward, if that makes sense.
No,
Um,
that makes perfect sense. And I feel like that's probably better, like you're going to see a doctor who understands everything rather than like just the thing that they memorize. Please carry on, but it makes perfect sense for me.
yeah, and I think the other thing that I found really useful, and I only did when it got to my A levels because I was quite like nervous slash embarrassed, but speaking out loud. And so what I do is with my mum for my A levels, we kind of like went through the entire textbook together, just like talking it out, like almost like you're having a conversation because the way I work is like I wrote learning, but then also having a conversation about it. And so I found that I really struggled in school when someone else is talking to me, like what they're saying doesn't go in my brain. So like even when you ask me a question, I really have to like think halfway through, like what was the question and did I answer the question? Whereas if it's like something that's written down and I can like physically see, or I'm like constant like going back and forth, then it works better in my brain. So I use a lot of like flow charts and stuff like that where I draw like the whole process, like step by step, and then talk it out with someone. Or the other thing people do, and I've not actually done this myself, but like you open up like a Zoom, like kind of now, but it's just blank and you just almost pretend that you're having a conversation with someone. And that can be quite helpful.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I there's a new AI thing where like you put in information and it turns it into like a weird
Oh
podcast,
yeah,
which
yeah.
is crazy. Just hearing some two people discuss like I don't know politics and such like oh and this thing happened. But yeah, I think being able to understand the why makes so much sense because it makes it more tangible than just kind of being like this happens next. So yeah, I think hopefully that should be able to help some people because I'm sure that exams are coming up for some, unfortunately.
I think, sorry,
Yeah.
one more thing to add to that just came to my brain. I
Mhm.
think the other thing that I find really helpful, which we like, it wasn't really a thing at school, especially when I was in like secondary school doing GCSEs and A levels, is like people like, whether you're working in classrooms or in the library or whatever, work for like hours on end. And what I find with neurodivergent brains or even ADHD brains is that we can hyperfixate quite well. And so when you have like for what I get done in half an hour, other people probably get done in an hour. But it means that after half an hour, I take a 15-minute break. And what I did during my GCSE, actually, this is coming back to me, I didn't even remember this until right now, is I played the same song or the same two songs after every like half an hour and I jump up and down for the entire song. And so it's your like routine of like, this is what I can control and I'm going to do this every half an hour. You get your movement in, which like kind of relaxes your brain and also like keeps that blood flow going. And then also like you're working for short amount of periods, which generally works better for neurodivergent brains. So yeah, it's going back to like not like comparing yourself to everyone else. And if you're in a school environment, it's hard to like jump up and down and listen to music. But every half an hour, I'd go to the bathroom if I was in a classroom, which people might think you're going to the bathroom a lot, but you know what? Who cares?
Yeah, that's so cool. I definitely listen to how I started a thing where, as a joke to myself, I started listening to Cotton Eye Joe as like a work song. And now it actually really helps because it's just like a loop. It's kind of silly, so it makes my work a little silly. And yeah, just playing a single song on repeat really helps for some
Yeah.
reason. And it means that I don't get sidetracked either. I guess kind of you mentioned running and exercise, so I feel like now we should talk about your marathon that you recently did. What made you decide to do a marathon?
Okay, so being completely honest, I was out at a party. I might have been a little bit not in 100% logical state. And I applied to run a marathon because someone once told me, well, someone recently at the time had told me that I wasn't a runner. And that I like wasn't like super fit, and like that they were really fast, and they were like, yeah, I could run a marathon tomorrow. And so I decided that I was going to run a marathon, having never have run before. And I signed up, and you have to apply. And I signed up through like the general ballot, which you've got like a less than 1% chance of getting. And then I signed up through a charity. So I signed up for the National Autistic Society. And you have to write an entire application of like how you're going to fundraise and why you want to do it and how you're going to achieve your target and why you want to apply for that charity and all these things. And then 6 months later, I get a call going, hi, this is the National Autistic Society. You've got a place to run the London Marathon. And I was like, oh my God. And so I got out of bed and I started running. And as like smooth as that story sounds, it really wasn't smooth. The furthest I'd ever run before that was 1.5 kilometers, and that was at school in PE. Obviously I'd played like a sport throughout my life, but I'd never really run. And then yeah, when you give a neurodivergent person a task, they can put their mind to it and do it. And that's basically what happens.
That is such a funny story. I absolutely love how it was just, yeah, you mentioned that you're stubborn earlier, and I absolutely love that. I see myself in that. Not that I would sign up to do a marathon, but something else to prove myself. How did you go about getting into training? Did you, like some people are like, this is my training plan. I'm gonna eat like this, and I'm gonna have to try and meet these goals each week, or were you a bit more vibes based? How did you do
So
that?
so basically I got the place to run it in 2024. And I started training, but it was very much like I'll run 3 times a week. But I was also playing netball. I was also going out quite a lot, being at university. Wasn't taking it 100% seriously. And then halfway in, 6 weeks in, so it's a 12-week training program. 6 weeks in, I got injured. I've had loads of injuries, like I mentioned, being hypermobile. But I tore the ligaments in my ankle and then also broke my ankle. So it was like, yeah, no, you can't run it. And I was like, no, 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 I will. Like even till the week before, I was like, no, like I was in a boot, but I was like, no, I'll run it in a boot. But obviously that wasn't going to be possible. So I had to defer until 2025. And then this year I decided, right, like I've only got like one more chance to do this, and people had already donated, and I was like, this is like real people's money, and this is like a serious cause, and I need to take it seriously. And so I gave up my like partying lifestyle, if you will. um and I kind of like focused on it. I stopped playing netball for the year just so that there wouldn't be any other kind of like injuries, and dedicated like at least 3 times a week, 3 or 4 times a week to running. And then like had like a program and stuff, and then got quite into it. And then yeah, I ran the London Marathon.
Great. And you also did the Hackney half, I think, recently as
Yeah, I
well.
did that
Yeah.
on Sunday,
Yeah.
yeah.
So has running now become like, I guess, a part of your life? Like how are you balancing it so it doesn't become, like another kind of work-based thing?
Yeah, so I think what I find is that my like hyperfixations or what I enjoy fluctuate quite a lot, and like it will be like it will last like a few years and then it might like drop off. So at the moment I'm loving it. I found that towards the end of the marathon it became almost like a job, because like you're forcing yourself to go and run 32 kilometers when everyone else is like in bed at 6 o'clock in the morning. But now that there's like a little less pressure, and I'm like kind of still recovering from the marathon because it's quite obviously taxing on your body, and so I haven't been able to do like many runs, I found that I really miss it. I think that I took for granted like how good it is to not only like have a routine, but also to like have that like way to like kind of like expel your energy, being ADHD. And like I've always gone to the gym, like played netball, but I think running, like there's not really anything else like it. And so yeah, I really enjoy it. And I think that there's this whole concept about running that you need to be really fast, and you need to run a marathon, and like I'm not particularly fast, and like okay, yeah, I've done a marathon but like with some training, right? And running, the way I started was literally like I'd run for a chorus of a song and I'd walk for the verse, and I'd run for the chorus and I'd walk for the verse. And that's like people don't tell you, but like that's literally how it starts. Like anyone can start running. Running doesn't need to be for like a certain type of person or like this, that, or the other. I think actually for neurodivergent individuals, it can be like a really useful tool to help you with, yeah, your general life.
Yeah, and it's just such a great way to look after yourself because I feel like you have to like lock in and use so much of your body. How have you gone about kind of looking after yourself post marathon? Because I guess it must have been such like I guess a shock to your body, and then also like mind wise. You mentioned when we spoke earlier, like post running like fog and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think so. I like assume like the hardest bit would be the marathon, and then it'd be done, and I'd be like, oh my God, thank the Lord. And I woke up the day after the marathon feeling the worst I felt in like years, not physically, but mentally. And I found that there's something called post-marathon blues, which I didn't even know was a thing. But if you think about like the science, basically in very simple terms, the like neurotransmitters in your brain, so the things that like kind of like connect all your like cells in your brain. You might have heard of them like dopamine, so like your endorphins, like your happy hormones and stuff like that. Um, they kind of are on such a high from like such a long time, like running and like having this routine. And for neurodivergent people, like it's even more. If you think about like for 12 weeks, I've dedicated to my life to doing this. And then even on the day, I'm running for like 5 hours. And so like your body's just like in overdrive. And then you wake up the next day and like you're like, what am I like, what now? What happens now? And so that's been the hardest thing for me, like getting back into a routine, getting back into like doing daily tasks. Like my executive functioning has gone completely down the drain. I've really struggled with that. Um, physically, like it's like nothing compared to how I found it mentally. Which I get no one prepared me for. Like I was in complete shock, and maybe it's just that like being neurodivergent, it hits you like a truck. But yeah, so I'm still kind of figuring it out, but then at the same time I'm kind of glad that I don't need to force myself to run anymore, and like it's actually something that like I can go out after this and run 2K, and when I stop at 2K, that's fine, I can go home. Like yeah.
It must be really cool to be able to push your body to that limit and see that you can do it. And just know that you can continue to do that if you want. Like I'm sure that the next time you run, if you want to, the London a marathon to the equivalent of the London Marathon, you'd have to, like train yourself back up again. But being able to know that you've done that, you could do it again. It must be like it's a big accomplishment. So well done, claps for you. We are nearing the end of our time together. So one thing that I wanted to ask you is and we've spoken about so many things. So what's one thing you'd like somebody to take away from today's talk? And that's such an open question. I'm so sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Oh, I have to think. I think like speaking to neurodivergent individuals themselves, who probably the people on this chat, I think it's if someone like this is kind of like how I live my life. If someone tells you you can't do it, show them that you can. Um, because there are so many times that we get told that like we're not good enough, or we can't do this, or we're not made for that, or even if it's just that like you don't look autistic or whatever it might be, like when people make comments like that, it's more of a reflection on themselves than on you. And that's what I really had to like shift my attitude, especially like after getting my diagnosis, or even now, like when I get faced with doctors that like if I was to tell them I was autistic and they go, but that you don't look autistic, like that's something that they're dealing with, not something that like reflects on who you are. Um, and so yeah, like you can do anything that you put your mind to. And when someone tells you no, show them you can.
Yeah, and you proved that today. Lovely. Well, I don't think we have any more questions from anybody, so I'm gonna let you go early because I know that you need to go run or just relax after a day in hospital. So thank you so much for everybody watching. Thank you so much, Nidhi, for joining us today. I'm now going to list when our next talks are. So our next one coming up is Wednesday, the 4th of June, with Ali Mason, a children's book author, who recently published, no, I think it was a couple of years ago, The Autistic Guide to Adventure. And then Tuesday, the 17th of June, we have another role models talk with Brian, who is one of our facilitators here. He does a lot of the Minecraft sessions and anime club, and is also a neuroscience whiz. So thank you so much, and hopefully we'll see you there. And yes, I will let everybody go. Thank you so much, Nidhi. Oh, would you like to plug anything? Would you like to?
Yeah, I just
Yeah.
wanted to say say, if anyone wanted to message me, had any questions, or wanted to check out like the resources, like I mentioned, those leaflets and stuff, you can Google Behind the Smiles or type into like the chat bar behindthesmiles.co.uk and it will all come up. And then you can also, all my links are there if you wanted to message me or anything. But yeah, thank you very
Amazing.
much. And
Thank
thank you
you.
guys for listening.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.